Most people don't know much about ancient Persia. In fact, we probably picture it more through movies and pop culture than from anything we learned in school. Rome, Greece, even Egypt, those civilizations get plenty of attention. But what was going on in the East? That part of history often gets overlooked. And yet, ancient Persia was once the largest empire the world had ever seen. At its peak, nearly half the world's population lived under the rule of Persian kings. So let's take a look back through a few centuries of Persian history and try to learn a little more beyond what the textbooks usually cover. So where does our knowledge of the Persians actually come from? Mostly from three Greek writers, Herodotus, Xenophon, and Theudas. But there's a catch. The Greeks were rivals of the Persians and didn't really understand their culture. A lot of what they wrote is biased or just plain inaccurate. Even the names of Persian rulers come to us through a Greek filter, and they don't sound anything like they did in the original language. The Greek alphabet didn't even have letters for some Persian sounds. For example, Cyrus was actually Kurush, Darius was Darav, and Xerxes was Kyara. And they weren't really kings in the Greek sense, they were Shah. Luckily, we have more than just Greek accounts to rely on. One of the most valuable sources is the Royal Archive at Persepolis, which holds thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform. These tablets are packed with economic records that give us a much clearer picture of how the Persian Empire really worked. The Persians, also known as the Parsa, were an Indo-Iranian people. Alongside their close relatives, the Medes, they migrated from the regions of modern-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan toward the richer lands of Mesopotamia at the end of the Bronze Age. They called themselves Ariana, a name that still echoes today in the word Iran. Interestingly, the word Pers in their language meant warrior or strong man. At the time, the Persians were pastoral nomads, but not in the way we typically imagine. They practiced vertical nomadism, moving with the seasons along mountain slopes, spending summers in highland valleys and winters in the lower foothills where the grass was lusher. This style of migration can still be seen in some regions of the Caucasus today. Their way of life was simple and rugged. They ate modestly, rarely drank alcohol, and were renowned horsemen. Unlike the people of Mesopotamia, the Persians wore trousers ideal for riding and distinctive pointed hats called tiaras. They also stood out physically from the native peoples of the Fertile Crescent, taller in stature and lighter in complexion. In the 7th century BC, the Persians captured the Elamite city of Anshan. From that point on, all Persian kings would begin their titles with King of Anshan. In the 6th century BC, Cyrus II came to power, the man who would later be known as Cyrus the Great. At the time, the Persians were still vassals of the Median Empire, but Cyrus led a rebellion against the Median king, Astyages. Several powerful Median clans, dissatisfied with Astyages' rule, defected to Cyrus. With their support, he defeated the Median army at the site of the decisive battle where Astyages' forces were crushed. Cyrus founded the city of Pasargadae, which would become the new capital of his growing empire. But Cyrus didn't stop after seizing power in Media. He launched a series of rapid military campaigns, conquering Parthia, Armenia, Cappadocia, Elam, Lydia, and Ionia. Some regions, like Hyrcania and Cilicia, submitted to Persian rule voluntarily. With much of the region under his control, Cyrus then set his sights on the dominant superpower of Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. According to legend, the Babylonian king Nabonidus had angered the chief god Marduk. Marduk, it was said, turned to Cyrus and called on him to come to Babylon, depose Nabonidus, and take his place. In reality, when the Persian army approached Babylon, the gates were opened without a fight. The city's nobility, disillusioned with Nabonidus' rule, surrendered the city to Cyrus and welcomed him. Cyrus proved to be not only a brilliant conqueror but also a shrewd statesman. He treated conquered peoples with surprising leniency, provided they didn't put up fierce resistance. Rather than ruling with an iron fist, Cyrus preferred to rely on local elites. Defeated kings were often spared and even granted high-ranking positions within his empire. He generally avoided interfering in the internal affairs of subject nations. Where possible, local officials remained in their posts after conquest, which helped minimize resentment among the ruling classes and reduced the likelihood of rebellion. Cyrus also freed many peoples who had been displaced by the Babylonians and Assyrians. Among them were the Jews. He allowed them to return to their homelands and even provided funding for the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. That's why he's remembered with great respect in the Bible. The truth was, Persians made up only a small minority of the empire, roughly 1 in 20 subjects, so Cyrus couldn't rely on brute force to maintain control. Instead, he built a system based on tolerance, cooperation, and local autonomy. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus turned his attention to securing the northern borders of his empire from raids by the Scythian tribes. But this campaign would prove fatal. In a fierce battle against the Massagetai, led by Queen Tomiris, the Persian army was nearly wiped out, and Cyrus himself was killed in action. After his death, power passed to his son, Cambyses. Almost immediately, many of the land Cyrus had conquered rose in rebellion. Cambyses spent the next few years on military campaigns to re-establish control. Once order was restored, Cambyses launched an invasion of Egypt. He captured Memphis, took the pharaoh prisoner, and brought both Egypt and Libya under Persian rule. His next ambitions were to conquer Carthage and Kush, but those plans met setbacks. The Kushite campaign failed due to severe supply shortages, and the invasion of Carthage was called off altogether because the Phoenicians providing the fleet refused to fight against their fellow countrymen. Meanwhile, another revolt broke out in Babylon. Cambyses set out to suppress it but fell ill on the journey and died before he could return. Power was supposed to pass to Cambyses' brother, Smerdis, but a man named Darius stepped in. He claimed that the person posing as Smerdis was actually an impostor, a magus named Gormata, and that the real Smerdis had been secretly killed by Cambyses long before. Using this accusation, Darius seized the throne. Darius was not a descendant of Cyrus, so to legitimize his rule, he declared himself a descendant of Achaemenes, the great-grandfather of Cyrus the Great. From that point on, the royal line became known as the Achaemenid dynasty.